So as mentioned, after the screening, we're going to have a panel discussion. The discussion is going to be moderated by Yasmin Jiwani, who is a feminist academic and activist. In her research, she examines the intersectionality of race, gender, and violence in media narratives of violence against women and representations of racialized peoples. Currently, Dr. Jiwani is a professor in the Department of Communication Studies and Concordia University Research Chair. May I ask you to stand up? Just. Our second guest is going to be Touhami Rachid Raffa, who is an Algerian-Canadian jurist currently based in Quebec. He is a human rights activist and ex-president of the Islamic Cultural Center of Quebec City, where the Quebec City mosque shooting took place on January 29, 2017. Can I ask you to please stand up? Also joining us is Marilou who is active in the field of performing arts as an artistic consultant, performer, and writer. She regularly writes cultural critique, articles, and commentaries on various platforms, and is vocal against discrimination in the cultural milieu. She was the first to publish a critique on the widely protested play Slav, and currently studies law at McGill University. Can I ask you to stand up, please? So before the screening, I would just like to say that due to the heavy content of the film, we have active listeners. There will be two people next to the door, Graham and Caroline. They're right over there. And they will be available if anyone needs to vent at any point during the screening or just talk through some of their feelings and emotions or whatever kind of anything that comes up for them. So they are available at any point. I want to thank you guys, and please enjoy the film. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to start this very interesting discussion about this film and to be able to parse through some of what I thought was quite problematic and some that I thought was quite endearing. And the endearing part was also problematic. So I'm going to stop there, but I'm going to turn it over first to Rachid and then to Marilou, to comment on the film, and then when I get a chance, and this is the best part of being a moderator, because you actually have the power. So that's the point where I'll try and insert myself in terms of like how this particular film sheds light on a number of different things. But I'd like to start just by framing it, by talking about the film in terms of its psychological examination of the kinds of feelings that motivate people to engage in hate, but at the same time bring it back to a local context and also an international context in the sense of how, in fact, that hatred manifests itself in terms of a race-based hatred, as well as an anti-Semitic hatred, as well as Islamophobia. So to actually sort of conjoin all of these different ways in which that kind of hatred comes forth. But as well, what I'd like you to bear in mind is how, in fact, everyday racism is so linked to institutional racism. So yes, we've had Dia's very insightful examination of the feelings that motivate these people, but at the same time, what are the conditions that are actually favoring it? What are the conditions that are nourishing this? Whether it's the hatred of Muslims, whether it's the hatred of people of color, or whether it's the hatred of Jews, which seems to be, in this particular film, incredibly intense. So I'll turn it over to Rachid, who was there January 29th when the Muslims were killed, and who can talk about that.
Good evening. This film is remarkable for me for one reason. There is hope, and it demonstrates that ignorance is the first reason for rejecting the other. There is always we and the others, and these three cases, I think, three cases, who made a work on themselves and find humanity which God gave to every one of us.
Thank you very much. I'd like to turn it over to you and say, would you say that it's ignorance? And actually, before we turn it over, how would you define ignorance?
Ignorance is the way we think that we are alone, we are the best, we are the whites, we are the people of the north, and the other people from the south, a little bit different, are subhuman. And as far as, I had this experience many times in my life during my 34 years of experience in Quebec City with people who became friends. And after years, after having a few scotches, they told me that I changed them. I don't know why. I didn't say anything about my religion. But they said, please, pardon us. We were racist. And we don't know why. But we recognize that with you, there are people like us. There is no difference. And I am convinced that ignorance is a kind of misrespect. We don't respect the other. The other is not like us. We are better, we are stronger, we are more intelligent, we are educated, we are developed. And if the others are not developed, they're subdeveloped, it's their fault. It's like a sick man, it's his fault.
So ignorance basically is something that is not necessarily tied to education, but is a fear of the other combined with a sort of self-superiority. So I'm going to turn it over to you to comment on that, particularly in light of your work around Slav and a number of other, issues that have come up in the local context.
Right. Pardon me, because I just saw the film at the same time as everyone, and it's pretty difficult. I think partly because although I am a person of color, although I do the work that I do, I realize now that I very rarely hear and see those things. I feel them. They're directed towards me, but I never necessarily hear these words. I never get to have these conversations. So it's a very, I don't know how to name that feeling of knowing that this is what you're experiencing, and this is the reason why you're experiencing the world the way that you do, but they will not necessarily say that to your face. So I think to answer your question, I think part of it is ignorance, but I think it's also willful ignorance. It's definitely, there is a lack of self-awareness and awareness of who the other is, and not knowing who you're talking about because you're not talking necessarily to them and you're not hearing them. But I think the ignorance is crafted as well. I think you're right to highlight that it's not only something that is very personal, and it's not only a personal hatred of the other, but it's also a structural problem. And I think this structure also creates or curates some kind of ignorance in people. And I think it's a good excuse. But I think it was very interesting to see that if you're confronting people and telling them that the way they're reasoning does not make any sense, you can see that kind of crafted ignorance coming in, because even though you're presenting someone who's racist with the facts, they will just hold on to that ignorance, although they have all the tools to have access to the knowledge. So that.
But I wanted to bring you back to that notion, because one of the things that the film really sort of portrays is a number of things. One is that a lot of these guys who join these movements, and I noticed the absence of women in there, except as supportive, sort of like spouses or partners, but that for many of them, they were working class in poor areas, and except for a few cameo appearances by people who were rich and who were at the top, there wasn't really anything about the fact that it didn't go beyond the fact that this is just a feeling. So it brought me back to what I have written about and what others have talked about, which is that kind of the variant that we call Canadian racism, this incredibly polite kind of racism that as long as you stay in your place, you're okay. And which is often sort of like challenged on the basis of, or contested by saying that, you just need to be more educated. So it would be like taking somebody like, like Alexander Bissonnette and saying if he only had contact, if he was only educated, he would never have done what he did. But if it wasn't him...
He visited the mosque with a group of students of Cégep Garneau a few years ago, and he came back many times. And but going back to the film, I'm wondering if someone else than this very beautiful girl have been involved. Let's say a big guy like me, black. I'm wondering if he will have success to be in touch with these people, with their feeling, because she succeeded. She went far inside them, but because she's a girl and she's a beautiful girl, this is a question.
Well, first to answer your question, I think it's not only about education. I think education can be linked to power, and if you lack the education and lack the power, maybe the only way you can express your racism is through like direct violence. But I think with power comes other opportunities to press the others, and you have more tools to be racist without being explicitly racist. And maybe you have more tools to hide it and to make it seem like it's something else. So there's that. And yeah, I think it's easier to call someone your friend when they are friendly and when you're interested in them, and that's where I think being a woman comes in. I think myself, I think I have a lot of privilege. I'm a light-skinned woman. I can be very soft. I can be very calm, and I was born here. Usually when I talk to people, well, in the theater world where I work in French, I am a francophone, I was born here, I don't have an accent. I think when I talk to people, to white people, they can be like, oh, she's kind of like us. It's easy to kind of not be racist with her, but if I become angry, if I let myself feel all the things that I could feel when someone is being racist, then I become a threat, and then it's easier to dismiss whatever I'm saying and not hear it. And I think people who are experiencing racism when they are on the receiving end of a lot of violence, it's a very difficult situation, because if you react, it's seen as an attack. If you just let yourself be angry, then you're the reason why the other person was being racist in the first place. So it puts you in a kind of weird situation where, and even watching this film, it kind of lets you believe that if only you're nice enough and you explain things kindly enough, then racism will end. And that's not how it works. Racism was not created by people of color. And I think it should not be on us to always be calm and to risk being killed by someone, because you don't know if they're the kind of person who will listen and become your friend or not.
I remember an expression by a lady, I forgot her name, a professor in France, and it's French. l'expression tranquille du racisme ordinaire. That's systemic racism. And we do have a very good example in Montreal and Quebec City, where the government allowed Uber to enter the taxi industry. The taxi industry in Montreal and Quebec is a ghetto, obliged ghetto, for immigrants and for Muslims first. But we don't know. We are nice, we accept people, we are tolerant, we are not racist. But it's the way. And excuse me, going back to what happened in Quebec City, this horror didn't happen somewhere else. Even in France, even in the municipalities governed by the Front National. It happened in Quebec, in the province of Quebec, in Canada. And the politicians, the justice, the crown, and the police didn't accept to recognize that it is a terrorist act. I'm sorry, it is a terrorist act. It is. And the sections 83 and 718.2 AI of the Criminal Code. But believe it or not, these haven't been challenged at all in court. Why? Believe it or not, the widows didn't have a lawyer. The orphans, 17 orphans, didn't have a lawyer. The wounded, neither. Why? Because all have been manipulated by the Crown, by the prosecutor, and the politicians. And first of all, Mr. Couillard, and the mayor of Quebec, and all the pressure from the public opinion. We cannot allow to have a terrorist attack against Muslims. If Muslim committed such an act, it is a terrorist. But the other way doesn't work. In Quebec, in the old city of Quebec, in Canada, this is not acceptable. Then I have not been allowed to talk to the widows. Another lawyer, you know it very well, Hassan Gillet, who is also an engineer, was not allowed to talk to them. We have been put away by people as community leaders, so-called, because they were working hand in hand with the authorities. And 7 months after the killing, when before the tribunal, the prosecutor said, we are going to sue Mr. Bissonnette only on first murders. No one contested, because there was no one there on behalf of the victims, which is a scandal. And this society has a very strong racist anti-Muslim movement, and mainly in the elite, not only the middle class or the lower class. The elite is working on these people. They are insulting the multicultural Canadian system and telling that we have intercultural. What does that mean? It means nothing. You find intercultural thing in one book by Gérard Bouchard, period. It's a myth. And they say to Québécois that your identity is not good and you don't know what you want and so forth. This is a crime. Do you know a fixed identity? It's moving everywhere. What we are today won't be the same 30 years from now. Every society is progressing. Then I can give you a few facts, you know. I'm sorry, it will take time. 10 days before the killing, on January 19th, 2017, A lady had been arrested. It was denounced by a Muslim lady. This lady, Françoise Giroux, was on a website, an Israeli anti-Muslim, anti-Arab website, and she was blackmailing, and she was, how we say, threatening. She was threatening the mosque, the same mosque we're talking about. We heard about it a year later, which is a scandal in a society and in a state governed by law. We are not in dictatorship. We are in a law system. And the Justice Department and the police said, oh, it's better to put it away in order that it doesn't interfere with the Bissonnette case. That's incredible. I have 3 questions. Did they take measures to protect us? Did they inform the management of the mosque? Is there a link between this lady and Bissonnette? No one knows. And all of a sudden, the debate went somewhere else. Are we going to accept condemnation for 25 years or for 150 years, which is, I don't care. Even if he released, I don't care. What I care about is terrorism and hate crime. And because this gives the people concerned the tools to find help from the authorities. Don't be afraid. Another murder happening very soon. You know how many right groups, militias in Quebec City? 15 showing themselves in the public place. There is one, the 30% militia, they know 3%, I don't know, I don't remember the name, but it's in a paper I wrote, 35 pages paper I wrote about all that, and it will be available here very, very soon. I will send you a copy, and it's free of charge. One of this group, the 30% one, is armed, is legally armed. And no one can enter that association without a permit, an armed permit. They can do what they want. You know that after the killing, the mosque was protected for a few weeks, then the police disappeared. And I asked Lieutenant Vézina, why? And he said, we spent a lot. There were 50 people attending that meeting. I asked him why, and he said, we spent too much money protecting you, we don't have any more money. Ask the politicians. Then I made pressure on the management of the mosque. They wrote to the Minister of Public Security, and the Deputy Minister sent his answer, believe it or not, ask the federal government. Thanks God we are Canadian, also Canadian. Quebecers, I don't know, after 43 years now, I feel a stranger. Even in Algeria, my mother country, I feel stranger everywhere, and I feel better. But here, I invest a lot, but I'm still a foreigner. Last September, listen to that, what happened. Early September at night, during the night prayer, someone came, he was drunk, with a bottle on his hand and a bag on the other hand, shouting, insulting, trying to enter the mosque. One of our friends took the risk to talk to him, and he was always beaten, almost beaten. He called 911. The police never appeared. 2 days later, they said we didn't have enough cars, police cars. That's the way they treat us. We are sub-citizens, and we are subhumans. Why? Because we are not organized, we don't protest. I tried to make a demonstration on these people, but no one followed me. Sorry for our Muslim brothers. We deserve what happened to us because of our weakness.
Thank you. I think, I'm going to open it up, but if you want to have a last comment, what I'd like to just reiterate is in a way what the counter to this film, which is this is not all about just feelings. This is more about what's structured in terms of the courts, in terms of the police, in terms of the protection, in terms of grievable bodies, because they might not come to your march, but they all came to commemorate. They all came out when those bodies with the wreaths and stuff were there to say that, hey, we too can relate to that. So it was interesting that they could come out at that point, but not to protect you.
And yeah, I think I would say that there is a kind of misunderstanding about what racism is. Like it's hatred, it's feelings, but not necessarily, and that's where ignorance comes in, because ignorance is your perfect cover if racism is about feelings, because if you did not know, then you cannot be racist. So what we have is a world without racists, but there is still racism. And we're not willing as a society to connect the dots and see things for what they are. I mean, Nazis do not consider themselves racist. A threat is not a threat. Nothing was racist in here. Everything was fine. But then if you are not willing to name it, then how can you fight against it? How can you defend yourself? And I think also, what did I want to say? I had something to say about this. Oh, right.
But I wanted also, because that's exactly the point. I mean, the way in which this film put it, and the way in which the alt-right put it, is that they're on, like, it's a lateral field. They're the left and the right. And there are civil rights movements for people of color, and these are white civil rights movements. So there's a kind of lateralization instead of the fact that this is a hierarchy,
right,
in terms of who has power.
Mm-hmm. It's a way to make this system, this discrimination and this power imbalance invisible. And what they're really, and that's what's really interesting actually, is that they're saying, if I'm saying white power, it's equal to them saying black power. So what they're saying is kind of equating the experiences, and because they know the power that they do have, they're not willing to admit it, but just the fact that they're saying that proves that they know the power that they have, because they know white power is dangerous. They know that it hurts people. They know that they can kill people. They know they have that power. So when a black person comes in and says black power, they believe that it's exactly the same thing. So just a black person defending themselves and just wanting to be alive and stay alive and have a life, that's a threat, because that's dangerous. They see themselves in that manifestation of kind of life, and it's not equal. It's not. Self-defense is not an attack, and it's important to see that and to name it and to fight and to defend yourself against it. And it's also, and it's also important, I thought it was very interesting what the man was saying about how there's a kind of demonization of racism, and it only exists when it's very obvious and violent, and even then we're not willing to say that terrorism is terrorism. But anyway, so if racism is only these extreme acts of violence and the people who are the perpetrators are monsters, then you can never see the other types of racism and all the insidious forms of racism, and it can also be benevolent, and it seems nice. Racists can be nice. These people seemed nice, but it doesn't change the fact that racism is there, and it's a structure that keeps certain people from moving forward. And I think that's something that's hard to understand when you're not on the receiving end of racism, but I believe that most of the barriers I've faced in my life as a person of color and all the racism that I've faced, people have always been nice as they were being actively racist. I'm not giving you that job, but I'm so sorry, like, you're a nice person, it's just that you don't have the experience and you're not exactly the type of person we're looking for, you're not a good fit, I'm being really nice to you right now, but I'm also being racist. So that's something we have to kind of unpack.
Great, thank you. I'd like to ask if anybody has a question or comment. Okay, I'm going to turn it over, but before I do that, I have to tell you that, you know, the impact of racism is very akin to post-traumatic stress disorder. So you can think about all the victims of racism first, in terms of how much they need. But from a mental health service that is certainly not qualified or would never even consider the impact of racism in such a credible way. So this is research that's coming out from the US and increasingly from Canada, that the impact is that much. So the fact that there are all these people that are walking around shell-shocked should tell you something. But yes, you're right, there is a, yeah. Do you want to comment on that?
No, maybe I would like to add something. The impact on children is worse when they see their parents not working, being insulted. I know a family with a lady with hijab, with kids, and all of a sudden a guy in the street took her hijab down and insulted her, and the kids were terrified. And the impact is much more dangerous on children. And I am sorry to say that Quebec is a distinct society. First of all, the influence of France. Instead of looking at Toronto, people, the elite. This is another special thing to Quebec society. They look at Paris. Second, the elite. The elite. I have a terrible example. You know Jamila Ben Habib? She's teaching Islam at University Laval. It took me 3 months to find it out. It's secret. We are in a secret society. And she's doing so well, they gave her another course on the Middle East. I wrote to the rectrice, how you said, la rectrice de l'Université Laval. Not the dean, no, c'est plus haut. The president of the provost. And she answered me, we're two guys protesting. There are 300,000 Muslims in this country, in this province. We are two of us. And she said she has been selected on the highest criteria of the academia and blah, 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 blah. I answered back, but didn't get any answer. I said it's like choosing a neo-Nazi, anti-Jew, to teach Judaism. And this lady came after the massacre because a friend of mine had been killed, professor at Université Laval, and every year on commemoration she's there and crying But all this is, excuse me, shit. And the problem in Quebec, it's impossible to have a debate on racism. Remember what happened with this commission on discrimination and systemic racism. It didn't take place. But even though people don't read, first of all, in the documents, if you read, every kind of discrimination were covered. But in the call of to select the community groups who are going to make the consultations, it said, I have it here, they excluded the religious discrimination. Then, even at the beginning, it was shit. And even shit, it didn't happen, you know. Then it's terrible that this society, this modern society. And you know, when they said we are going to disappear, they import, it's importation, people qualified and francophones like me, and I have a lot of friends who are driving taxis and working, some are unemployed. Why are they importing francophone people? And now there is a shortage of manpower. It's very strange, and this denial, every time we are talking about racism, they say, we are not racist. Who said that? You all. And listen to that. When they said we, they exclude the others. I'm not excluded. I am excluded from the we. We are not racist. Then we are not Québécois. We are still neo-Québécois. We are still on the door. I am still on the Société d'accueil. I am welcomed, but at the door. I need to enter. And I cannot be buried in Quebec City, the only capital in Canada with no Muslim cemetery. For 3 decades, the private cemeteries refused to give us a piece of land. Then we decided to buy a piece of land. It's impossible. Legally, it's impossible. Politically, we are not helped at all. It's a shame.
Thank you. Did you want to say something to that?
Yes, the question, what are we missing? I would say that we're just missing racism itself. I think the best trick that racism has is to kind of be invisible. It cloaks itself in this veil of, glamorous, that there's always a reason why we're turning down immigrants. There's perfectly good reasons that have nothing to do with racism, and it's always the case. So what's happening is that we're not seeing racism because it always has excuses. But we're not willing to listen to the people who are affected by it, and they are the ones who can talk about racism because that's where the impact is. If you're looking for racism and looking for the keywords, you're not going to find them. So we really have to listen to the people when they're saying they're experiencing something. However, what's happening right now is that we're more affected by what these people are saying than by what they're affected by. Like the filmmaker who was reading what she was receiving, the person was really upset by her saying that more than by her receiving that. And that's kind of what's happening as a whole in Quebec, where we feel, I say we, I don't even know why I'm saying we, I'm kind of including myself in Quebec, but I'm still being affected by what's happening. But Quebec is saying, you say you want, the inquiry on systemic racism, that's terrible. You're saying we're racist. Oh my goodness, let's not have inquiry at all because that's terrible. So that's where the shift needs to happen.
Thanks very much for your question, and I especially appreciated your pointing out the intersectionalities, the parallels between sexism and racism, which often get tossed out of the water because everybody's so happy to embrace the anti-sexism perspective. And in a secular state like Quebec, it's even more important. But the racism often gets shunted on the side, right?
Well, I think coming from the theater community, and that's something I know about, and I'm not an actress, I was more behind the scenes, so I was in a position where all the actors, the actresses who are people of color were telling me about what they were experiencing, and they felt like they couldn't talk about it, so that's why I started talking about that. But part of the work that I'm doing is also about representation on screen and on stages, and I've been told quite a lot that it's not that important, and people are getting killed, and there's much more important things to talk about and to work on, and of course, but I also believe we need to connect the dots, and nothing exists in a vacuum, and the reason why you hate someone can be linked to the fact that you don't see them ever. Most of the people we saw in the film, they were saying, I never met a Muslim person before. It's my first time talking to any of you, and it's very scary. And I think if you start seeing more diversity on screens, you kind of feel like you know people a little bit better. And but at the same time, it's even more complicated than that, because in the French Québécois television, you start seeing Muslim people on the screen, but it's always in a situation where someone is getting killed in the family because Muslims they do stuff, and it seems very it's still white people writing these things, so it doesn't really help. So you have to have representation everywhere in the screen, on the screens and behind, and the people who are writing the stories, and we have to do so much work there. And maybe then, if I am born white in a white society, but I see all these people on the screen, and I feel like it's not scary anymore, and I can just hire them, and it's okay, then there's something that can be said about that as well.
True. I mean, I'm from communication, so yeah, I would agree with that. But I would also, again, go back to what you said, which is Alexander Bissonnette came to the mosque. He came so many times. He talked to them. So it was like...
He came with a group, with their professor, and they spent hours talking to people.
It's not just about contact. It's not just about knowing the other, right?
Yeah, it's very complicated in Quebec, and unfortunately, the society is looking at Paris instead of Toronto. Do you know that in Toronto last year, the government decided to fight against racism, and they create a unit within the government with power to fight against racism, which is not even thinkable here.
Yeah, but Rachid, this is that is called ROC, Rest of Canada.
Yeah.
Right? This is Quebec, which sees itself under siege all the time from...
Yeah, after the English, now immigrants. And after the immigrants, the Muslim wave.
Don't forget the Jewish people who had to leave.
Of course, but the Jewish people organize themselves, and there are a little minority in Quebec compared to the Muslim ones, but they are respected. Yeah. You will be respected if you are strong. This is what liberal democracy is about. It's about pressure, group of pressure, and lobbying. And we, unfortunately, Muslims, we represent nothing. And I am afraid, I'm not optimistic at all, because if you see in France, after almost 2 centuries of Muslim presence in France, 5 million people from different countries, no importance at all. And there is institutional racism. France has been condemned by the Human Rights European Court many times. It didn't change nothing. It's still the same. And people are waiting for for Messiah, I don't know. And we are doing the same here, especially in Quebec. But a lot of my friends left this province to the rock, and they are very happy.
Which leads me to a very nice conclusion, which is that we need to organize. And we really need to be there at the march. But more than that, I think it's organizing at the local level. And so Cinema Politica actually is a platform for that, in terms of screening truth to power, but also in terms of creating a venue where such organizing can happen. So on that note, I'd like to thank you all, and thank my panelists here, and thank Cinema Politica.
Try to do something. Don't forget Quebec City, which is located in the suburb of Montreal. As Mayor Drapeau used to say, Montrealers from Vancouver to Halifax.